Cool. All right. Well, we're recording. Evan, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm awesome, Evan. I'm really thrilled to be talking to you today, and I'm so grateful that you accepted sort of my invitation to have a dialogue, and it's something that's really new and exciting for me. And the fact that you're sort of the first one that I'm doing this with, really means a lot to me.
Yeah, especially since there were so many other people ahead of me on the list. I was just the first to respond to the email.
I'll take it. I'll take it anywhere I can get it. I know you're busy, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Let me do just a brief intro of you,
Sure.
just to sort of share with everybody what I know about you and why I was so keen to meet with you. So full disclosure, Evan and I have known each other for, I think, 10 or 11 years now.
Yep.
We met while working at the same company. And after a stint, at that company together, we each went sort of our separate ways. I continued my career in California. Evan is originally from Florida, I think.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then you eventually moved to California. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And I think you're one of the many amazing things about you that I saw right away was you're super charismatic. You're very sort of charming and friendly, and you're the kind of guy that people want to be around. So I think it's no surprise that you've been successful, both academically as well as professionally. So I want to kind of dig into that a little bit and just sort of understand. I think, there's parallels about your professional career and your sort of academic career.
Yeah.
And also look at some of the things you've done personally, outside of, work and academia. So that's kind of you in a nutshell, as far as I know, and why, again, I was interested in talking to you. Is there anything just like right off the bat, like you want to share or to sort of complete sort of that little summary of you?
No, I think that's perfect. And yeah, it's been a really kind of interesting, career arc for me, even though, I think many would say I'm still kind of early on in my career too. So, one of the things that I think I've been, really fortunate is to have a lot of different experiences across different sizes of companies and with different individuals and in different geographies. So, have really, it's really been an exciting career to date. And if the last 2/3 is as good as the first third, then, it's going to get even better. Right. So, yeah, super exciting time.
Good. And the other thing I want to add too, I think you've been married now for what, 5 to 7 years, maybe approximately?
Yeah. I should probably actually know that a little bit, but 5 to 7 sounds good. I think that's a good answer.
I'm guessing. I know I met your wife.
I am too. But 5 to 7 sounds right.
I know I met your wife, Courtney, and you guys were together when you and I met, although I don't think you were married yet. So I know it's been a long time. It's at least 10 years that you guys have known each other, maybe longer.
And she's in customer success just like you. So she's following in your footsteps now.
Right. I don't know about following in my footsteps, but I know that's something that we have in common, and I have communicated with her a couple of times. And just like you, very charismatic and smart. So I can see why you guys, sort of hit it off.
Definitely.
So cool. So let me start with some of the questions I just sort of wanted to talk to you about and just understand about you a little bit more. And, again, for me, the purpose of these conversations is me really more to learn and get to know you better. And ultimately I'll share this on YouTube again for other people to learn. And maybe they're sharing some of the same life experiences or goals that you had, and maybe they can sort of learn from it. So I'm going to just look at your LinkedIn profile while I'm talking to you, so I can sort of reference your background. And for everybody watching, I'll put Evan's LinkedIn profile in the meeting summary, the recording on YouTube, so you can go look him up and find out more about him. But so, it's really interesting. I know that when you and I met, this was, you were already at University of Florida, I think, and you were pursuing a law degree. Let me talk a little bit more about that real quick. So you have your bachelor's in political science, classical studies from University of Florida. You're a Gator, big town.
Yep.
then you got your law degree also from University of Florida.
Yep.
And then if that wasn't enough, you went ahead and you got yourself a master's in business administration.
Yep.
From University of Massachusetts. So let me just talk about that for a second. That's a lot of school, and not
Yes.
everybody does, go that far.
Mhm.
Was it your plan? Did you know when you started, let's say when you graduated from high school, or did you know, you said, I want these 3 degrees, or did it sort of just happen? And if so, how?
No, when I graduated high school, I think the summer that I entered, I went to UF like as soon as I could, right? Like summer B, as soon as I could move into the dorms, I was like out of my parents' house and at school, and I thought that I wanted to be an engineer, but not a computer engineer. I thought I wanted to be like an industrial engineer, and within my first semester, having not even taken an engineering course, I was like, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. And I think I went through like 4 different majors in my first 2 years in undergrad before I finally actually settled on, I tried to think about what I really loved. And what I really liked is, politics at the time. I thought maybe I wanted to be president at some point, right? Still might, actually. And then I also really liked ancient history, specifically like Greek and Roman history. So those why I picked those 2 courses or 2 tracks to study. I picked classical literature instead of language because I'm terrible at foreign language, and I realized that if I had to learn both Latin and Greek, I probably would have flunked out of UF. So if you did literature, you only had to learn one. So I took Latin, and interestingly enough, this is probably true of taking any foreign language, but Latin in particular, because there are so many Latin roots in the English language. I feel like it really helped me with my speaking and sentence composition when I was, reading and writing and speaking. So it was interesting, to take Latin and to learn kind of how to structure sentences correctly. And that's kind of like, that was kind of the turning point of saying like, okay, like, what do I really love to do? And it's like, okay, well, I really love reading and writing and speaking. And, it was kind of between politics and the law then at that point. And the further I got into college, the more I kind of became a little bit disaffected with politics. And I figured that people probably weren't going to pay me very much money to, give a classical critique of the movie Gladiator. So I probably couldn't make money being a classics historian somewhere. So I figured law school is probably, the right move. So that's kind of what prompted that move into law school from undergrad.
Got it. Okay. And how many years went by before you sort of made that realization?
I would say that I figured out I wanted to go to law school about my second year of undergrad.
Okay.
And then when I was in law school, I actually thought in my last year that I might want to go back and get an MBA, and UF had a JD MBA program. But at that point, I was accruing so much debt that I figured I should probably go out and make a little bit of money before I went back to school. So I put the MBA on hold for a little bit until, I don't know, maybe I was like 4 or 5 years out of law school.
Okay, I got it. Okay, and now just quickly, I want to dig into your professional career, but do me a favor, if you can, on a high level, can you just sort of align where you were at professionally and try to match that up to your academic sort of advancement? So when you got your law degree, where were you, again, professionally, compared to sort of, where you got maybe after you got your master's, et cetera. So I just want to see if there's any correlation there. I assume that there is, but I'm just curious.
There definitely is. When I went to law school, I thought for sure I wanted to be like a criminal defense attorney, something like that, right? I spent one summer at the state attorney's office in Florida and realized that I hated it. I think it's for some people, it just wasn't for me. And really actually spent the second year in law school feeling very kind of lost, for lack of a better term. Everyone else seemed to kind of have a good idea of what they wanted to do out of law school. I had no idea. Much like in undergrad, you
Yeah.
know, everyone seemed to already know, like, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be this or that, you know, a teacher, whatever it may be. And I didn't really know, right? So kind of similar track to undergrad, and like kind of having that the middle years being concerning. It's like, well, what am I doing? Why am I paying all this money to not know what I want to do in a couple of years, right? And it wasn't until my last year of law school where, and I actually, funny enough, I spent my first years of law school still lifeguarding in Gainesville too.
Right.
So it's, you know, so it's like, so like there was no professional track in law
Yeah.
school for me, really.
Yeah.
For better or worse. I think actually probably for better, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, it's, you know, like I had friends in middle school that knew they wanted to be a dentist. And I was like, shouldn't you wait a little bit? Because you know, you're probably a little too, you're not experienced enough to really know what you want to do. I kind of felt the same way in law school. And the one big guiding light for me actually was my last year in law school. I ended up with classes only Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the week. So that means I had Thursday and Friday off. And I was like, well, like I have to do something better with my life than just like go to the bar Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday night, right? Like I need to do something to fill these days.
Yeah.
And one of the things, you know, growing up in Florida that I, you know, kind of always aspired to be or always thought was really cool was NASA and Kennedy Space Center, right?
Okay.
And you always go see space shuttles taking off. And
Right.
that was, and, you know, my dad is in science, and I always kind of felt a little bit of pressure, like, hey, you're learning about Roman history and you're going to law school when your dad's this big time scientist, and like, why the hell aren't you doing that? You know? And I was like, well, like, all right, well, maybe there's like a place for me at NASA, right? So I ended up finding the chief counsel's email, because it's a public government,
Right.
you know, website, right? And I fired him off this email that basically said like, hey, I'm this law student at UF. I have Thursday and Friday free every week for my final year. And like, do you guys hire law clerks or volunteers or whatever? And I said like, I'll work for free. I'll sleep under my desk.
Yeah.
Like all I want to do is get the experience. And I sent off this like horrible resume that probably also still had lifeguarding on it and all this stuff, you know, and figured like I would never hear back from this guy, right? You know, like chief counsel of NASA, like there's no way he's going to give me the time of day. And sure enough, 2 days later, he's like, yeah, we hire a law clerk every year. We haven't hired one right now. Why don't you drive on down and, you know, we'll interview you. And, you know, before I knew it, like he was offering me a job that actually paid money. And like, yeah. And it was like the first time in my entire like undergrad law school career where I really felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do, which is like in-house, cool, like cutting edge technology, legal work, you know, and like that really felt like where I was supposed to be. And that's what I think really kind of kicked off, you know, the rest of my career in tech.
Got it. That's a great story that you took the initiative to do that. And it just goes to show that sometimes it does work, you know?
It's actually worked for me a couple times in my career, similar kinds of strategies.
Well, you know, I guess it's true what they say, right? You know, follow your heart, you know, do what you love, etc. You know, I think the universe has a way of sort of aligning itself to you when you're doing that.
Right.
And so I do believe in that. Doesn't always work out that way, but I think for the most part it does. And it's a really nice thing when it does. Now, real quick, one last question about school before we go into your professional career. And some of the things you do outside of work that I think are interesting. I've heard a lot of debate around, you know, do kids today need a college education? You know, MBA was sort of the thing to get for a long time, especially for me growing up, and I'm a little bit older than you. But I'm hearing, hey, you don't need that anymore. Better to just go, you know, straight and start up and, you know, build a company and like live life. I don't know. So that's been hotly debated. I obviously have my opinions on it, but I'm curious, having gone and, you know, gotten 3 different degrees, what would you say in that regard?
I would say that there's no right answer, you know, and anyone that's going to give you the answer other than yourself also doesn't have the right answer for you. You know, I think that there are I think the right path for everyone is unique to that individual. And it just so happens that for me, it was getting a degree and then a law degree and then an MBA. And that kind of is what made sense for my career progression. I actually think it's really interesting and important that I took that break in between getting my JD and my MBA, because if I had not gone into in-house work and in tech work, the MBA may have been effectively useless, and I would have been paying off a degree that I would have never used. Now, I think I actually use my MBA fairly regularly now, kind of from the business side of my brain as well as the legal side of my brain. But I think that pushing people or pushing yourself into situations, especially when you're incurring debt, that you can't see that path forward for yourself, you're not excited about that path forward for yourself. I would certainly pause and think about that. I think education is always good. And even if you get a degree that you end up not using, I think education for education's sake, I think is really important. I tell my wife, one of the things I want to do is go back and get a PhD in philosophy at some point. Never gonna use it, but I'm just really interested in it, but I think that I think to feel that pressure of oh, I need to go get a bachelor's degree, or I need to get an MBA, or I need to get this or that. I think it's unfounded, and I think that we owe it to ourselves to not listen to what everyone else says about where our career should go and what we should do, and actually do what we think is where we fit the best, and that maybe that's med school, maybe it's not, right? Maybe that's being a lawyer, maybe it's not, maybe that's going to a trade school, maybe it's not. These are all really good things that the world needs right now, right? So you shouldn't feel pressure to go get a computer science degree if you hate coding, right? There's no point to that, because all you're going to do is probably not be a great coder, because you're going to be sitting there angry that you're in a job you don't like. Get that job that you like and that you're going to enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. And again, going back to that old saying, do what you love and you'll never work another day in your life. Again, I do truly believe that. That is true. And some of the lessons I'm trying to teach my oldest son, who's now 13, and as he's starting to think about being a young adult and what in life will mean. Now, real quick, one last thing on the school. Isn't it true one of the benefits of maybe continuing your education and an MBA specifically, I've heard, is the networking and sort of the people that are within your sort of class that you work with? And I've heard that oftentimes you continue sort of those relationships beyond the MBA program. So would you say there's some, not just even the MBA, but even just getting your undergrad, having that college sort of experience, maybe the first time you're away from home, not living under your parents' roof, and you're socializing, 24/7 with other people your age, etc. So would you say that there's value to that, especially these days where we find ourselves more and more online, less connected physically, and leaning more towards virtually?
I actually don't. I actually disagree with that. I think that it's true, right? So I think that that's why probably people go to Stanford or Harvard or NYU or something, right? And there's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think you're right. I think in those kind of MBA programs, networking is really, really important, right? And and so many of graduates from there are holding these big time positions and stuff that there is that kind of implicit network effect based off where your degree is from. But I was actually, I got my MBA because I wanted to learn the materials in the MBA. And that's not to say that people that go to those programs don't also want to learn that. So that's not what I'm presupposing, right? But I was at a point in my career where what I really wanted to do is be more impactful to the business as an attorney, right? Especially an in-house attorney. And I wanted to be able to sit in accounting meetings and finance meetings and, corp dev meetings, HR, whatever it may be, operations, product, and be able to actually contribute substantively and not just be the attorney in the room, but actually be able to add some business impact to it. So interestingly enough, when I did my MBA, I really mainly just looked at course load. I wanted to make sure that what I was learning was the same thing that the people that went to these kind of bigger time, maybe
Right.
top 15 or 20 MBA programs were learning. So I want to make sure that I wasn't, getting some sort of fly by night
Sure.
MBA program, and I was actually, getting my money's worth. But I did it for the innate knowledge as opposed to networking. I think that so much of really good networking
Yeah.
comes from just being um, an, like an inquisitive and a thoughtful and a person that will put themselves out there. And
Yeah.
I actually have never really looked at pedigree, not when I'm hiring. I mean, I've hired a number of people in my career, and I don't, I barely look, I look to see that they have a law degree if I'm
Yeah.
hiring for an attorney position, but that's about it. In fact, like there have been positions at Poshmark at my current company where I've actually thought, do I really need an attorney for this, or can I get away with and get away with is the wrong term. Can I also hire a legal professional or even just a business professional
Yeah.
to do the same job? So I think, to me, and I actually think to a lot of my like peers, it's more about who you are as an individual and the excitement and substance you bring than about the pedigree that you may bring from a degree, for
Got
instance.
it. Got it. Makes sense. Okay, perfect. All right. Let me switch over to, again, your professional journey since you and I met. And
Sure.
again, it's quite admirable, and I just want to explore it a little bit.
Yeah.
So I remember when you and I first met, again, this was back in like 2010, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You were already working as part of the legal team for the
Yep.
company we were working at. But I remember you telling me early on, you said you wanted to be GC one day. I remember you said that. So
Yep.
that was 2010. And then, I'm looking at your career, and, you've been at quite a few different companies, some really big ones, some public, some private. And I see also on your LinkedIn profile, there's something about you're the founder of Evoc Capital. I want to talk about that separately in a second.
Sure.
But I guess what I want to understand is, just talk to me about that progression. You're talking about in 10 years, approximately, you achieved your goal, your objective, at least when you and I spoke in 2010, you said you wanted to be GC. So can you just talk to me about that progression? Did you find it easy? Was it challenging? Did anybody help you along the way? Like, did you have a coach or a mentor? Just help me and everybody watching just sort of understand, how did you make that happen? How did you make your dream come true, besides the college education you got, obviously?
Yeah. So I probably suffer from a bit of overconfidence sometimes, right? I remember when the company that we met at, they went through a GC change, and I was sure that it should have been me. Now, maybe 2 years out of law school, it shouldn't have been. Looking back on it, but I think that it is important to have that. What I would call tempered overconfidence, because that's what's going to push you into putting yourself out there for those kind of roles. And I think, making sure you're continuing to push yourself into, okay, maybe I wasn't ready this time around, but how do I get ready next time around?
Yeah.
And even if it's not next time around, down the road, what I want to do is make sure that at some point someone looks at my resume, talks to me, and they say, of course,
Right.
of course he's our general counsel, right? Like, that's where I wanted to get to. And I think, one of the things I did is I learned good stuff, but I also try to pay attention to the bad stuff. Like I interacted with either peers or managers that I said, when I become a manager, this is who I want to be, or this is who I don't want to be. And I tried to remember both of those things, right? Or like, when I interact with GCs, I'm like, okay, these are the things that they do that I like. These are the things they don't do that I, like or don't like, right? And kept on trying to like kind of figure out how to put those building blocks together, or leave building blocks out if it's like, habits or things that I didn't really align with or agree with. And what I really tried to do is always try to figure out where my own gaps were, right? So I think that I talk about overconfidence, which I think is like actually kind of important. But what you don't want is a kind of misguided or kind of stilted view of yourself through it. Like
Yeah.
I've always believed that I could do anything that I put my mind to. You put me in any situation, like I can figure it out, right? Outside of like, I don't know, landing a 747 or
Yeah.
doing brain surgery, like I'm pretty sure I could figure it out. And even those, like I think if I had a book next to me, I could probably get it. But the thing is that I think that like what you can't do is you can't be overly confident, but then also not be self-reflective enough to figure out what you still need to work on, right? So I was constantly trying to figure out like, all right, what do I need to do? Like, what am I not proficient in? And I'm still doing that. And I tell that to my team right now too, that I'm like, there are things that I don't know that you know, and I want to learn those, vice versa. There are things that we as a team don't know, and we will learn those. And like in each role that I sat in, I tried to make sure like, the core responsibility is do your day job, right? But how do I make that efficient enough, right? To squeeze a little bit of extra time to fill those gaps, right? So like when I worked at VMware before I took my first GC role, like myself and it was really, I'll give the majority of the credit to my manager, created this like rotational program, right? Where you could still do your day job, but you could go and kind of learn from all the different groups and the different lawyers that were doing things, right? From the employment lawyers or the product lawyers or the M&A and the corporate securities lawyers, right? And it's like, it's that constant kind of building and filling those gaps that you identify for yourself. So you got to like always believe you can do it, but you got to make sure that like, all right, in order to do it, here are all the things that I need to do and all the things I need to learn, right? So it's like a good balance of introspection as well as like confidence that like you can make it happen.
Got it. So there's a lot there that I want to sort of drill down a bit,
sure,
if you don't mind. So, for example, you talked about self-awareness and reflection. Definitely something that I try to do as well. And in my case, anyway, sometimes I do it too much. I'm overly critical. Have you ever experienced that at all? Have you ever, found yourself maybe in an effort to improve yourself, maybe being overly critical? And if so, how did you sort of deal with that?
All the time, all the time. And I think that like I think to your point, it can be sometimes counterproductive, and it can, a lot of times I use either colleagues that are really, that I'm really close with, or, prior managers or something, and reach out to them and kind of stress test this, like, hey, am I thinking about this the right way? Am I being too hard on myself? I use my wife, Courtney, for that too, and I say like, tell me that I'm achieving and that I'm thinking about this and that I'm not like being too hard on myself. Right. Cause, I think that I constantly, and I'm sure you're the same way, is like, once I fill one of those gaps, I rarely ever celebrate figuring this out. And all I see are all the other gaps that I still have to figure out, So like, I'm constantly trying to remind myself to like, almost kind of celebrate the little things, right? And sometimes the little things aren't little things, like, it's almost like as soon as at Poshmark we IPO'd, all I was doing was thinking about all the other stuff we needed to do. I'm like, wait, hold on. Like I've learned so much through this process. Like I need to give myself like at least one evening to like order a pizza, like, drink a bottle of wine and like celebrate this, So it's like, it's this, it's almost like you're like holding two strings. You're holding this like overconfident string and you're trying to pull that in. You're holding this like, introspection string, and you want to just like balance those two things. Cause if you let yourself get pulled too far one way, then you're going to miss out over here. But same thing, so you're just kind of, it's a constant, and I tell my team this all the time. It's you're going to constantly calibrate those two, those two stresses in your professional career.
It's a balancing act, right?
Yep.
So let me ask you a question. Yes, self-reflection, and I think, the willingness to sort of admit that, you might have blind spots is a key. I think a lot of successful people, you want to strike a balance, not be overly confident. Now, despite that, I still have blind spots, and I can remember one major one about was right after you and I worked together when I went to a different company. I had a major blind spot and I needed 360 feedback to get it, to learn about it from my team, so 360 feedback. It's kind of scary, right? You're opening yourself up to criticism, from your peers and I think more importantly, your team.
Yep.
And good leaders shouldn't be afraid to do it. And for me, it was a game changer, super eye-opening, and that I had a major blind spot I wasn't aware of. I was overly confident, was blinded by my hubris, and I didn't know that I had a major blind spot. And I was grateful that one of my team members had the confidence and the courage to sort of tell me.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, at any point in your career, did you experience anything like that, whether it was an employee or a peer or whoever, somebody that made you aware of a blind spot? Because despite all the self-analysis, we're still not always able to see all our sort of areas of improvement.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I'll certainly, I think there's it's an interesting progression, right? I think that, where I am today is certainly not where I was 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. Right. And I think that we talk about this kind of balancing act. 10 years ago, I was probably too overly confident. Right. So I was so yeah, there were a few times where I think I was knocked down in a way that I needed to be knocked down a little bit, knocked down may be the wrong word, but just brought back to reality, and I think that that's good, right? Because I think that sometimes that is the problem with rapid career succession is you kind of lose that perspective. And as I've grown teams at my prior job and this job, I think that's actually really helped me keep that perspective. I think that if I was just working by myself, you have a tendency to not have that check like you're talking about, right? Yeah. And one of the things that my team at my prior company and I did really well is I think we had really, really open and transparent discussions with each other about what was going well, what was going wrong. If we were in a meeting, me and any member of my team with somebody else, and they felt like I was, over indexing on something or approached something the wrong way, they would tell me. And my current team, as I built it, I've told them that I think transparency is the most important thing, I'll always be transparent with them on when I don't know something, if I've made a mistake, and I try really hard to be upfront about that and to make sure they know this is okay to make mistakes and we're going to, and there are things that I don't know, and try to really impress upon that on them too. And I'm the team, when we get team meetings together and stuff, those are spaces where we shouldn't kind of parade around and say hey, this is what I did and I did everything right and I'm going to log off now because I'm so important to have other stuff to do. But instead it's times for us to say hey, I'm having this problem. Have you all ever experienced this? How should I handle it? Or I'm running into this speed bump. What's the best way to handle it? And and I try to make sure that I ask those questions of them, hey, how should I handle this? Because I think that really, one of the things that I tell the team is that what I think a lot of companies do wrong. I don't say this part, but what I do think a lot of companies do wrong is that they only have these 360 sessions and check-ins and performance reviews and everything once a year. And everyone sits down and they're wait, what the hell? I've been doing this wrong for a year, but instead what it should be is every week, we should feel comfortable saying hey, I think you handled this a little weird, or hey, maybe we should talk about this. And so that way there's no big cataclysmic moment where everyone finds out what they don't like about each other. And instead it's this ongoing relationship building. It's you wouldn't run your marriage or a relationship like that. All right, once a year, we're going to talk about all the shit we don't like about each other. It's no, every day we should work on building this relationship and talk about this together.
I love it. And I share a lot of the sort of values that you mentioned there. I'm just curious, how did you get to this? How would you describe your leadership style? And did this develop naturally, or did you learn it either through, again, your academic sort of success, or did you do any professional management training? I just want to understand that better.
So I haven't done any like kind of what I would call leadership training, right? So I think that what I've done is I've really tried to, um, watch and learn from other leaders that I've worked with really directly. And I've actually kind of had the benefit of working with leaders that I really admire, and that I think are really, impactful in who I want to be, when I'm a leader, or as I'm a leader now. And I've worked with leaders and reported to leaders that I thought just weren't ready for the role, or weren't right for the role, and that's
Yeah.
not a knock on them, at all. I
Yeah.
think that, there are right times and right places for people. And sometimes people get put in positions where they're not ready for, or whatever it may be. So, and I try to like constantly think about what made me feel good and valued as an employee, heard as an employee, what made me feel just like crappy, and like say like,
Yeah.
man, and there's been times where I'm like, man, I really wish I had a manager or a leader that I could open up to and like tell them that.
Yeah.
And I actually think I think it's good for people to have both of those experiences, because now when I'm interacting with my team, I'm like, okay, like I need to make sure that I'm not that I'm truly approachable, that I don't just say like, everyone's like, oh yeah, my door's always open, but like everybody says that,
Right.
and like, yeah, it might be, but I'm going to come in there, you're going to bite my head off if
Right.
I raise
Right.
something that's wrong.
That's right.
Instead, I want to be the person that like,
No.
we can always talk. And what I tell my team is like, look, like at some point, like as a leader or as a manager or whatever it may be, like you may have, like I may have to make calls that are unpopular. I may have to make calls that you disagree with, right? And that's okay. I want to know that you disagree with me. I think that's okay, and that's healthy and everything, right? But to have that kind of trust and transparency where we know that we can have, an open dialogue that, even if it's contentious, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's super important. So I've just tried to really, I've tried to really just soak in all the good and the bad kind of lessons that I've learned from,
Yeah.
the leaders throughout my career.
Right. Yeah. Again, I agree with you 100%. And yes, I think you can learn just as much from bad sort of managers as you can from good managers. You can learn what not to do because
Yeah.
you felt when you lived through whatever experience that was. And obviously, what you want to replicate when you experience something that's really, really good. It sounds like you've had some great leaders in your life that have helped sort of set the right example. And would you agree then, if I understood you correctly, I think the core value is establishing trust with your team, that everyone makes mistakes, and it's okay when that happens. Nobody's going to get their head, ripped off. It's like we take ownership, we learn from it, and we move on, right? Now, it's easier said than done, right? I know, at least in my experience, I've said that to teams over the years, but it's hard for them to believe. You have to sort of earn that trust, wouldn't you say? I mean, it doesn't come with the title. And,
Right.
and assuming you agree, like, can you talk about like some of the stuff maybe either you've said or you've done to sort of reinforce what you're saying? Because again, sometimes it's not enough just to say it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things. One is that like transparency works both ways, right? So like, one of the things that I think can be the most impactful is when leaders, really are vulnerable for their
Yeah.
team, right? And I think sometimes people mistake vulnerability with like, I don't know, being weak or something like that. And I think it's the exact opposite, right? I think that being vulnerable is actually like a real showing of strength, like I trust in our relationship enough, and I trust like kind of the position we're in enough that like I can tell you when something went wrong, and when I messed up, and like I need your help, right? I've asked my team for help because
Yeah.
I've messed up before.
Yeah.
And so I think that like I think that's super important. And man, I had a really good number two for it, but I think that like think that vulnerability
Yeah.
is really important. Oh, the other big number too is when something truly goes wrong. And a member of my team said this best, and like I'm going to do a terrible job of paraphrasing it, but it's like treat situations seriously, not people, or something like that, right? And so I think that like when stuff does go wrong, and stuff will go wrong, or when like you have friction points or times where everyone needs to like be all hands on deck and fix a problem or whatever it may be, that like the energy and the passion and the frustration that you have needs to go into the event and solving the event, and it doesn't need to go into the person, right? Even if the person's one that messed up, like you can handle that later, right? And probably in a more private environment where you can kind of like walk through it and make sure it doesn't happen again or whatever it may be. But if there's something going wrong with the business that you need to fix, the worst thing you can do is the person that you're working with get mad at them and be like, oh, what the hell, you're an idiot, like what's going on, because like that doesn't help at all. It probably actually very materially demotivates them, and they're like, well, if all Evan's going to do is yell at me, then I'm not going to tell him next time. I'm just going to try to solve it myself, or hope he never finds out, or whatever it may be, So like treat those triage the situation, seriously. But don't, put the weight of the situation on the situation itself, not on the person.
You're right. Got it. Absolutely. And I know it's easier said than done. Sometimes emotions sort of go out of control, hijack.
And I'm sure I'll get it wrong. I'm sure I've gotten it wrong, but like that's the general thesis.
Same here. Now, real quick, just summarize real quick, just so people get a sense of the scope. What's the size of your current team, like number of people, and then share like your first management leadership role. What was the size? I just want to sort of compare over the course of, 10 years or whatever it was.
Sure. Well, my first management role was when I was a head lifeguard at the city pool summer, but I don't know if I can count that as like a management position anymore. So at my prior job, I ended up hiring one additional person on the legal team, but then also ended up inheriting the operations team, which was at its height a team of about 8. So went from being kind of an individual contributor at the kind of middle stage startup to when we were a late stage startup at my prior job, managing about 8 to 9 people. So it's like a really fast ramp up from like a management perspective. And then in my current job, came in and there were about 2 people on the team, which for a going through IPO legal team was not nearly enough. So now we're back up to our head above water with about 6 people on the legal team currently.
Okay, awesome. So you mentioned earlier, interviewing, and I'm assuming again in your roles you've done quite a bit of interviewing, as I have as well. And the other day I was talking to one of my neighbors, and he was talking about he had recently had an interview with a commercial airline. He currently flies for the military. He's going to go in the commercial. And he mentioned like what an awful interview experience it was. And at that moment, for the first time in my life, I was like, I've probably interviewed over 1,000 people in my life, and I was really bad at it for a long time. And I feel awful for the poor people I subjected to my less than optimal interview skills. So I'm just wondering, any thoughts on how your interview style has evolved over time? And, have you changed it consciously or subconsciously, and just wondering if there's anything there as far as, when we look at that piece, because it's so crucial, hiring, right? We talk a lot about it, but it's an art form, and I don't know how much training you can get. You got to just do it, I think, in a lot of ways. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I would definitely agree. I don't know that there is, if there's effective interview training, I guess I haven't had it, right? But I think that I think there's a few things. One is that I think for hiring, what I really try to do is I try to not, I have a general idea of the role I want to hire for, but I'm always willing to have my mind change depending on who applies, right? So like I had an idea in the first person I hired at my prior job, like exactly the kind of individual that I wanted, like this like kind of perfect resume of a commercial attorney. But the three people that, after like, dozens of phone screens and everything like that, the final three people that made it on site were all three very different individuals, right? One was very recently out of law school, one was kind of the traditional in-house attorney archetype, and one had been like a litigator for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But in doing the phone screens with them and having the recruiter screens and everything, like, I allowed myself to say, well, like, I had this preconceived notion of who I thought was supposed to get the role, but I ended up really like, enjoying the conversation with it, thinking that these individuals actually could be the most impactful to the role. And I think that that's one of the things that companies really do wrong. I mean, I think that you need to have some sort of guide rails to guide the hiring. Obviously, you can't just like put up a job posting that says anyone apply. But I think throughout the interview process, like, you got to allow yourself to have your mind changed. I think that's actually a big part of being a leader too, is allowing yourself to have your mind changed. And then when you get into the actual interview process, what I try really hard to do is I try really hard to be, and this kind of goes back to transparency, is be honest about the job and the role. And here's all the exciting stuff, but here's going to be some of the boring stuff, because all jobs have it. Here are some of the things we still need to work on, and here are some of the things that the team probably needs help on. And could you help with that? How could you help with that? And show the highs and the lows of the job, because that someone's going to get into this job being like, this is the best company in the world. It's all going to be exciting stuff. And like, everything's great. And then they get into this role and they're like, well, wait a minute. Like, this company has things it needs to work on. Some of the stuff isn't super exciting. And, so I think that, like, you got to give people really realistic expectations of what they're walking into, which I think is a really important part of the interview process.
I agree with you 100%. And I try to do that without scaring them off either. But
right.
It's always a possibility.
Right.
Now,
that's right.
Now, real quick, we got about 10 minutes left. I know you have a hard stop. There's a couple of other areas I want to touch on real quick that I think are really interesting about you. But just real quick, you mentioned you didn't take any like official leadership management training.
Yeah.
Have you read any books about leadership, or if not leadership specifically, any books in particular that you would want people to know, like, hey, if you're going to read a book and you're interested in learning, more about yourself or leadership or success, I would recommend this book. Are there any that just sort of jump off the top of your head at all, or no?
So I don't read a lot of leadership books. I find myself reading a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of science books, philosophy books. I just got done reading How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which is a book all about Stoicism.
Okay.
And how Marcus Aurelius kind of approached his life and kind of his way of thinking throughout his time as an emperor, which I thought was really impactful. I think Essentialism is a great book. It's not really a key leadership book, but it's it's kind of all about clearing the noise out of your life and out of your work and out of your kind of personal mantras. But I've also read a lot of books about philosophy. I was really into like Buddhism and Taoism for a while, and read as many books as I get my hand on about those. And I think the key to reading is not necessarily what you read, but that you do it. I think that's really because one of the things that, and maybe there are some books that like, I don't know, those romance novels or something you buy in the grocery store. Maybe those aren't particularly substantive. I don't know. But I think that, like, it's almost like careers. It's like finding what you really love to read and learn about. Even if it is fiction, I think it's really important, because you can learn perspective and you can learn context. And even, I mean, a lot of fictional characters go through the same kind of turmoil that people and leaders and everything go through, right? So I think if you find what you really love to read, I think you can actually learn just as much as if you say, like, well, I kind of hate business books, but I'm going to read them anyways.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right. Last thing I want to talk to you about is at the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned, again, you're super charismatic and charming and funny. And I think that those qualities are definitely great assets, right? I mean, I'm okay with saying that someone with your same academic accomplishments may not have been able to achieve your level of success without those personal attributes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know that, for example, in your personal life, you did some stand-up comedy for a while, right?
Yep.
And that
Yep.
obviously takes a lot of courage. There's a lot of people that are just uncomfortable with public speaking, let alone
Right.
going on stage and telling jokes and subjecting yourself to heckling and criticism. And some of those,
Right.
audience members could be quite angry, especially after a few beers. So can you
Yep.
talk to me a little bit about that part of your life and, what drove you to it and how, if at all, you feel that if helped you again achieve your career goals?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a really interesting story. When I was kind of like feeling a little lost in law school, like we talked about, I figured that I should probably I don't know, I need to do something that I've never done before. I need to push myself out of my comfort zone. And one of the things I'd always wanted to do was stand-up comedy, right? And there was a club in Gainesville where if you there was an open mic night on Wednesday, and if you did really well at the open mic night, then some of the professional comedians, may ask you to host for the weekend shows, the pro shows. So I don't know. I wrote 3 minutes of comedy that I'm sure, looking back on them, were terrible. But for whatever reason, some of the professional guys that were there that night, really liked what I had to say and started inviting me, first to some of the weekend professional shows in town. But then it kind of just started spiraling into all right, now I'm going on the road with them. Now all of a sudden I'm featuring, started headlining for some comedy competitions and festivals and things like that. And I thought, it's to your point, you really kind of don't understand public speaking until you are, you're doing a dive bar in Biloxi to a bunch of people that are just hammered and hate everything you have to say. And and what I think is really interesting, one of the things that comedians always say is that there are no bad audiences, there are just bad jokes. And that really stuck with me, because so many times you hear people come off stage, or you hear, I don't know, interviews or whatever, whatever it may be, where people are like, oh, well, that other person just didn't like what I had to say, or, oh, well, that audience just stunk, or whatever it is. It's well, no, your jokes and what you say need to appeal to, the people in San Francisco the same way they need to appeal to the people that are in Macon, Georgia, right? Yeah. And maybe sometimes it's about how you say it, maybe it's about kind of how you phrase it or whatever, but the material should work regardless of where you are. And I think that that's a really important part of what I do as an attorney. I think it actually really, it helped me. It's dude, if I can go to, some small town in Ohio and tell shitty jokes to people at the back of a Chili's, and, then why should I be afraid of calling somebody up on the phone and telling them that I'm not going to renew their contract or something like that, no big deal, and I can call someone all the way across the world and tell them hey, I really don't agree with this and here's why, and and really express to them. So I think that, doing that really helped me in my career, because it showed me that hey, I know how to talk to everybody and anybody in any situation. And the really interesting thing, so this was actually my first job. So my parents were convinced that doing comedy was going to ruin my professional career, just ruin it. They were like, you're telling all these inappropriate jokes and you're uploading them to YouTube. And anytime someone types in Evan Ferl, all they do is they hear lewd and crude jokes all over the place. They're like, what are you doing? You're never going to amount to anything if you keep doing this. No one's ever going to hire you. Right. And I remember after I got my first job, I was out to lunch or whatever with the legal team the very first week, and they're just sitting around and talking, and they were like, when we were interviewing, it was between you and this one other candidate. And they're like, and we weren't really sure which one of you to hire. And they go, and then we found your YouTube channel. And I was like, oh no. And and I was like, oh, here it comes. And they go, and we watched a few of your videos and we knew we had to hire you.
That's great.
And, you know, and so I called, I picked up the phone, I called my parents. I was like, you'll never guess why I got hired. and like, I mean, I truly like, I feel like I owe a large portion, a really large portion of my career and my success to doing really shitty bar shows in Mississippi and all over the nation. Is learning how to do that and learning how to jump on a call like this and just like and connect with people, because that's really what it's about. And that's what so much of what our world is about, is just being able to build those bridges almost immediately is really impactful.
I love it. Evan, listen, this has been great. I know that you have a hard stop. Any final advice you want to give to maybe young individuals, professionals starting their career that want to achieve their goals? Anything you can just say, like best advice? Go ahead.
I mean, I think that the best thing is that, there's no one way to do things. There's no one archetype or way the puzzle has to fit together. I remember graduating law school and telling all my friends that I was going to go in-house, and they all started laughing at me, and they wondered why I didn't want to go to a law firm. And they said that, my career was never going to go anywhere. And here we are 10 years later, and some of them that were doing that are now reaching out to me, trying to figure out how to go in-house and start their legal career within the business. Right. So I think the best thing to do is listen to everybody, but understand which of those lessons and which of those, paths really work for you. Right. Because Antoine, you and I have had very different careers. We're both successful. You can be success, and success means different things to different people. Right. Success doesn't mean that you're the CEO of a startup. It can mean that you're the absolute best engineer on staff. It can also mean you're absolutely the best, EMT worker on staff or whatever it may be. Right. Like, success is dependent on is within yourself. It's not within the industry that you work in. It's not within other people's expectations of you. So I think you have to define where your own success is and meet that yourself. Don't depend on other people to tell you this is what success looks like. Now go get it. You need to say, this is what success looks like for me, and this is how I'm going to go get it.
Evan, that's great advice. I really appreciate you taking the time again to chat with me. Evan, thank you. It's been a true pleasure. For everybody watching, I'm going to post in the video, the description, a link to Evan's LinkedIn profile. I encourage you to reach out with him for networking opportunities. And if you want to watch his videos on YouTube, I guess you can find them still. If you want to see his comedy act. And, if you run into him at a bar, he's a great guy to have drinks with and talk about sports and anything else under the sun. Evan, thanks again. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Bye-bye.